So today we're going to be doing a little review on the Artify alcohol-based markers, and we're going to see how they perform. Now, I will be comparing these a bit to the Copic markers just because that is my standard marker that I go for usually with every drawing. It's what I am the most comfortable with, so that's what I'm going to use as a comparison. Right off the bat, they have this sort of rounded triangular barrel, whereas Copic markers have this kind of flat barrel. I like both of them. They're both easy to handle, they're both comfortable to use, and I like it because both of them don't roll off of my desk. If you've ever had like a pencil or a super round marker just roll right off your desk, that's why these barrels are shaped this way, so that they don't run away. The brush tips are so far visually the same. I don't really notice any difference. I love the brush tip from Copic, so we'll see how these ones hold up. So right off the bat, I do want to apologize for this atrocious lighting. That is still something that I am trying to figure out and hopefully will improve in the near future. But anyway, on to the art. I am starting with just a few sketches in my sketchbook. I knew that I wanted to draw some kind of little devil girl, so I needed to get a pose figured out because I'm doing all of this traditionally. I'm not using my iPad, which makes it a little bit more difficult because, you know, proportions, hello, that's nobody's favorite thing to figure out. I do speed this video up just a little bit so that it's not like 2 hours long. But you will see the whole sketch process and then we'll get into actually using the markers. And I am working on my usual paper, which is the Strathmore brand tan toned paper. If you're curious, I do have all of my supplies listed in the description below, so you can check those out. But let's get into it. So I will admit, this footage is a little bit old, and to be honest, Artify actually sent me this set of markers. It's the 80 set. They sent these to me in May, I want to say, and I have had these sitting around for an embarrassingly long amount of time and just did not get around to doing the review. I went on a trip to Europe in June, and my May was kind of wrapped up in trip anxiety and last minute things I was tying together, so I didn't get any footage out in May, and then all of June I was pretty much gone, and then the next month was just playing catch up. So I'm finally now settling back into things and getting around to doing this video. So here we are, months later, long overdue, but I don't have too much to say about the sketching portion of this video, so while we're watching me figure out these proportions here, let's talk about markers. Specifically what I look for in a marker. I'm very particular about my markers. I don't use marker paper, so when I'm looking for a marker, it has to be alcohol-based. That is the #1 priority for me, is making sure that it is an alcohol-based marker. If I try to use a water-based marker or an oil-based marker with this paper, it will absolutely destroy it. So I can only use alcohol-based markers. My second most important priority is the brush tip. I always reach for a brush tip marker, and that is because the brush tip will save your life. I cannot recommend it enough. There's always so much more room for flexibility. Depending on the pressure that you use, you can have thinner, thick lines, so it makes it easy to color in any area of your drawing without worrying about getting outside the lines or having it bleed. But my personal favorite thing about the brush tip markers is the ability to blend. I use what most people refer to as the feather blending technique, where you kind of flick the marker a little bit so that it creates these tapered edges, and then you come in with the next color and you color over that, and it blends so much easier. So if you try to do that with any of the other types of nibs out there, it just doesn't give the same effect. You can still use that technique, but it makes it a lot easier to get the level of blending that you want. Hopefully that makes sense. I am really bad at explaining things. Now, when I'm looking for a marker, I do also try to look for markers that offer refills and replacement nibs. Being able to refill your marker when it dries up and being able to replace the tip when it crystallizes or gets too old is a game changer. It really extends the shelf life of your marker, and why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want your marker to last years upon years rather than just however long it takes to dry up? That's something that has always irked me about other marker brands. And I know that a lot of them now do offer refills and replacement tips. I'm not sure on these Artify markers yet. I will get back to that. But that's another thing that I always look for. I also always look for markers that offer a good color range, because a lot of these new brands that are starting out, at the beginning they don't have a very wide range of colors. And sure, you know, if it's an alcohol-based marker, it's pretty easy to blend the colors together, so you can kind of work with what you have. But offering a wider range of colors obviously makes your life a lot easier when you're not trying to choose between 8 different colors for a skin tone, and they're all very similar or too different, and it makes it impossible to blend. So having a good color range is really important. And I will get back to you on how I felt about that as well towards the end of the video. Alright, I think I've sufficiently talked your ears off, so I'm gonna let the video play out until I get to the coloring portion, and we can just listen to some nice relaxing music while I finish this sketch. I'm just kidding. All right, and we're back. So let's go ahead and get into some coloring. So the first thing I did, obviously, which I do with every drawing, is test out and swatch some colors and try to get an idea of which ones I'm going to be using here. So I knew that I wanted her to be pretty much all red, so I did my best to test out the colors that I thought would work best for that. Now unfortunately this set of colors doesn't come with the biggest range of red, but that's to no fault of the markers themselves. I'm sure if I had a bigger pack, I would have a lot more reds to choose from. So for that reason, I'm going to be using both the Copic markers and the Artify markers together in this drawing. I'm going to use some of my favorite red Copic markers to kind of supplement where I need them, and it also gives me a good idea of how well these markers play together and if they can blend each other out. So for her hair specifically, I used one of the Artify markers for the base, and I did some blending with the Copic markers. And to no surprise, honestly, I found that they blended perfectly well together. I had no issues there, which, again, I was kind of expecting. They are both alcohol-based markers, and it would be really weird if they didn't work well together. But it is kind of nice to get a sense of how these markers play together, because I use a lot of different markers in one drawing all the time anyway. So it's nice to know that I can kind of rely on these two together when I need to. It is also nice to get a chance to use these markers side by side so I can kind of compare them. However, there really wasn't that much of a difference. I will say the Artify markers have a little bit more of a firm brush nib, whereas the Copic markers have a little bit more of a flexible tip. That is really just a preference thing. I don't think there are many pros or cons to either of them. It's nice to have a flexible nib with blending, but it's also really nice to have a firm nib when you're trying to color in very small spaces. So that's one difference to keep in mind if you're considering between the two. So as far as the brush tip goes, I say Artify passes with flying colors. Just keep in mind that it is a slightly firmer tip than the Copic marker. So if you like a firm brush tip, then it's perfect for you, but if you like a really flexible one, then you might want to lean towards Copic. But I do think it performs pretty much exactly the same. Now, are they refillable? The website says that they are, and it also says that they offer replacement tips, which again is a huge green flag in my opinion, because it's going to make your marker last way longer and it's a lot less waste out in the world. That is one thing about markers and traditional art. It's kind of a wasteful hobby if you're going through markers and you can't refill them and it's just all of these plastic things that are going back out into the environment. So it feels a little bit better to be able to refill markers both on your wallet and the environment. Now, as far as blending goes, I feel like these markers blend just fine. It's very similar to Copic and probably to Ohuhu or any of the other markers that are out there. I will say this drawing was not the best example of the blending capabilities for these markers, purely because I chose to do a character that is all red, and I had a very limited selection of reds and pinks. So that is not the fault of the markers at all. However, I do actually think it's kind of nice to see what you're able to achieve with a limited color palette, because even though I had only a couple colors to choose from for the skin, I was still able to make it work pretty well, considering. So take that how you want. I think they blend just fine. You can kind of see me doing the feather blending here, where I lay down the darkest color and then I'll come in with a lighter color and do my best to kind of make them work together. But I would say that Artify definitely passes on the blending scale for me, and I will likely find myself coming back to these markers when I need them. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with the blending part. Talking about the color range for these markers, again, I have the 80 set, which is a pretty large set, and it's funny that I still chose to do like an all red character. That's just the way that my brain works. I go, wow, look at all these colors that I have. I'm only gonna use one. I do feel like they have a pretty good color range for what I assume is a newer marker brand, so if that's something that you're concerned about, I think Artify also passes that with flying colors, if you will. They have quite a few different sets on their website, it looks like, so I think you've got a good amount of colors to choose from. Now, one other small detail to note is the scent. I know not everybody thinks about this, but I do know that there are some people out there who are a lot more sensitive to smells. And obviously with an alcohol-based marker, you're gonna have a scent. It's gonna be an alcohol scent. They are, I would say, no stronger or no less scented than Copic markers. So if you know what those smell like, you know that it's not the most subtle scent, but it's also not like the strongest scent. If you are sensitive to smells, I would just say make sure you're in an open space. They are like a different smell than Copic marker. I can't really explain it. I feel like Copic markers have a very unique smell, whereas the Artify markers kind of just smell like your standard alcohol-based marker would. Hopefully that's kind of a helpful description for anybody who's curious. But I would say I didn't really notice a super strong scent when I was working, at least no stronger than usual. Now, one last very minor detail to note here is how much ink I got on my hands while I was working on this. And it is important to note that I am like a notoriously messy artist in pretty much any environment that I work in, and I do get ink on my hands pretty much every single time that I use markers, but I did feel like it was particularly messy this time, and I don't really know if that's just on the particular marker colors that I chose. Sometimes one marker is a little bit more filled than another, and the ink can kind of get all over your hands. But I just felt like my fingers were a little bit messier than usual, and I did actually get an ink smudge on the paper, which was a bit of a bummer, but I cover it up later. But again, that's a super minor detail, and it might not even be the marker's fault. It could just be one odd marker that was filled a little bit too much, and that has happened to me with just about every brand of marker that I've worked with in the past. So just wanted to put that out there just in case. Now, just as a recap for anybody who maybe wants to skip ahead and just listen to my thoughts on the markers, let's revisit all of them. So number one is the brush tip, which I really liked. I think it's a great brush tip. It's a little bit firmer than a Copic marker, but that's up to your preference. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you like a firm tip, these are great markers. If you prefer a more flexible tip, maybe go for a Copic marker or something similar. But overall, I think the brush tips are great. Now the ink itself, obviously alcohol-based. I think the blending was fantastic, as you can kind of see here. I was working with pretty limited colors, and I think I still managed to blend them out pretty good, if I do say so myself. As far as the color range goes, I feel like they have a pretty decent amount of colors. Again, this particular drawing was not the best example of the color range because I, for some reason, decided to only use red. But I was using the 80 marker set, and I think it had a pretty good amount of colors to choose from. Now, as far as refills go, again, the website did say that they offer refills and replacement tips. However, I was trying to find a link for that, or like where you could get those online, and I was kind of struggling a little bit. So I'm not 100% sure that they offer refills like from their website directly. I will include a link in the description if I happen to find any refills. If I don't, then I'm still searching. And then, again, just to recap, the smell is not the strongest, but also not the most subtle. So if you're sensitive to scents, then maybe just make sure you're working in a more open room. And that is pretty much all I have. I think these markers overall are a really great alternative to Copic, and I think they're just a great marker all around. I think they're fantastic if you're just starting out, or if you've been drawing a long time. I think they're a great tool to have in your arsenal. I'm gonna go ahead and let the music play out for the rest of this drawing, just so you guys can see the finished product, and I will see you all in my next video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day or something? I don't know. Okay, bye.